What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sitdown, a crime history podcast. I am your host, Jeff Nadu, and as always, we are presented by Barstool Sports. If you're new to the show, make sure you subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comment section below. We continue to grow every day, and I appreciate all of your participation. Let me know what you think of the interview I'm about to do in the comment section below. We've got another great show, ladies and gentlemen. You know, on this show, we jump right in to the topic at hand, and it's back to the world of the Italian American Mafia. We've talked about all sorts of things the last couple of weeks: drug cartel bosses, cannibals, and now we're back to the Mafia, our bread and butter. Today, we've got a great interview planned, and it's really going to be an intertwined look into the life of a high ranking member of the Colombo crime family. Really, when we look back on the Colombo crime family, it has been a very dysfunctional mess. I think we can all agree with that. But there are certain people that shine through, particularly as strong members of the mafia. Today's subject, really in all talk, was a gangster. No one will disagree with that. But there is some very interesting things that I found out about Wild Bill Cutolo. Today, we're going to talk about his life from the beginning, his sad demise from the horse's mouth himself, his son, Bill Cutolo. Bill Cutolo Jr. is going to join the show today, and he's someone that I wanted to have on, and I think it'll give us a pretty interesting look into the life of Bill. Obviously, Bill Jr. was born and had his own life, and had to really deal with a lot of things that came from the demise of his father. Bill, I've been trying to get you on. How are you? You're looking dapper as always. How are you?
I'm doing well, Jeff. First of all, thank you for having me. I love your show, and this is a long time coming. Okay.
Yeah, and I appreciate you coming on. Anytime we can get somebody on of your stature, I appreciate it. You've been kind of in the news, for people that watch mob content, Italian content, American content. We've seen you doing sparse interviews from time to time, but you're largely someone that has been pretty quiet. We saw you though on MTV at one point. Your family did a show, which I'm sure we'll get into later, but I really wanted to kind of get into your father. We on this channel, I've done a lot of content on sons that follow their father into the life, and generally it's pretty widely known that there's a lot of people that do that. Whether it's the Gotti family, the Persicos, the Franzises, the Catolos, really wherever you go. You though are not a made member of the mafia. You definitely moved around in that world. I guess before we jump in, give me a couple words to describe your dad, because obviously you look at your father differently than everybody else does. Um, you know, who was your father?
Okay. One thing that I always try to say to people when they ask me a lot of questions in regards to my dad is that most people that follow this genre, um, they know my dad as Wild Bill. Yes, he was Wild Bill to me as well, but he was my dad first. And a lot of people, I don't know if they choose not to see that or however they want to view it, but he was my dad first. Wild Bill was a very serious dude in that life. Okay, he was very knowledgeable. Um, he did have a heart, um, but listen, I can't dispute the fact, and I cannot be hypocritical. And in my past, I was hypocritical. Um, that my dad was a bad man in that life. You didn't want to be on his bad side. But for the most part, for someone like myself and a lot of his close knit guys, and it was a small circle. He had a ton of guys. Don't get me wrong, but he had
Right.
a small circle that he trusted. And one thing about my dad, he didn't mince words. Okay, he meant what he said, and he said what he meant. You know, if you got orders from him, they were expected to be carried out. Um, I found myself in those situations a couple of times, um, and sometimes in that life, things don't always work out according to plan. But nonetheless, he was he was good for that family. He was good for the Colombo family.
I think, and that's something I brought up at the beginning. That is a dysfunctional group, right? And when I look
Yes.
back on really from the Profaci days on, there is not a lot of stone cold, like very solid dudes. There was a lot of dysfunction, and there was a lot of the Perskos were a group of sociopaths. They constantly wanted their own family just in their hands, and they really didn't have much in the way of supported people around him. And that's one thing I found out about Bill Cutolo Sr. He definitely was pragmatic. He was someone that could deal with multiple people, and he was feared, but he was also, I read that he gave to charity. He was very religious at one point. So I kind of want to jump right in and kind of get into his life. Your father was born in 1949. He's actually from right outside of Naples, right? Your
Yes.
family's actually pretty well known, from what I learned from you. And I always wondered, you mentioned to me that your father was actually related to Raphael Cutolo, who, if you know anything about Italian organized crime in Naples, as far as the Camorra, that's a huge name. I mean, that's one of the most well-known names in Italian mafia history.
Mhm.
Um, what do you know about that? Do you know anything about that connection?
It's funny how I found out. My dad had mentioned to me in passing that his father did not like the life at all, Carmine. He was the gentleman, my grandfather. He owned the Burger Prince off of 8th Avenue in the Fort Hamilton section of Brooklyn. And he wanted my father to overtake the business when he was going to retire. My dad worked for him full time, but my dad did not see a future in what he called verbatim flipping burgers. Um, so, um, you know, thinking back to um, how he was in his younger stages, um, he was crazy. I mean, hence the name Wild Bill. That's how he got it. But when the part that came up about us being related to Raphael, we were in a place called Sabaros. For people from Brooklyn, I'm sure they know us. There's many of them, but this particular Sabaros was kind of like they sold all the fresh meats, the sausages. Jeff.
Hmm.
So one day we just happened to stop in there. We were heading up to our club, and we stopped in there. My father knew the old lady that owned the place, and I went to go grab a bottle of sparkling water just out of the fridge. And when I took the bottle out, when I looked at the bottle cap, it had the name Catolo on it. Sabaro with their logo, but then it said Catolo on the top. And when we had gotten outside, I had just said to my father, I says, "How is our name, on the bottle? I thought maybe my dad just had a piece of the place." And he said, "No, no, no, that's your cousin." Right? And I didn't know nothing about this man at all. That's our cousin Raphael. He's on the other side. He's doing consecutive life sentences, and I guess it was his job to make bottle caps. And I guess in those times, over 20 years ago, they would stamp the guy who made the cap. They would put their name on the cap.
Wow.
So, and that's how it came across to me. Um, but you know, my grandfather, to lead you just a little bit, my grandfather despised the life, and I never understood why. You know, and then once I was told about that, then it all made sense to me. He knew what his cousin was about, my grandfather, and he didn't want to see his son, suffer the same demise.
Yeah, we see that all the time, really in any ethnic community in America, whether it's the Black community, the Spanish community, the Asian community, the Italian community, in areas where you have criminals on the corner that are making more money than the typical blue collar people. You could have the greatest father on earth. Occasionally some kids just want to move towards money. And it was probably evident that your dad, he's probably a hardworking guy, just didn't really want to, make, blue collar salary doing very little. And he wanted to go and make the big money, right?
Correct. Correct.
Let me ask you.
Correct.
So, your father attended New Utrecht High School, which is in Brooklyn. There's a younger photo of him. I actually
Yes,
read that your father met your mother in high school. Is that true?
that is true.
So high
That is true.
school sweethearts, pretty
Yeah,
incredible.
from the
And
age
we'll
of
talk about your
yeah.
mother. She's a pretty interesting woman in her own right. Very loyal to your dad. She seems like a very old school. You meet in the '60s. She was your typical, stand by your man kind of girl. They don't make
Yeah.
women like that anymore, Bill. I'm sure that
No,
you know.
no.
But tell me a little about your mom. What kind of woman was she?
My mom, they were together from the age of 15. From that stage on, they were together forever, up until his passing. My mother was a very tough woman. You know, there was very few things that feared her or scared her, I should say. Um, she was always afraid that my dad was going to get killed. I mean, that's a normal feeling from a wife, especially in that life. But my mom's family, her father was, I believe he was Sicilian and Calabrese. And my mother's life growing up, she used to get beat a lot, from her father. And when I say beatings, I mean beaten with like a rubber hose, you know. Um, and so one day, a quick story, my mother had called my father up. I believe my mother was 15 or 16 at the time, 16. And my mother was waiting for my dad. She let him know she was very upset about something. She said that she was at the house with her parents. Um, and when my dad had gotten there, my mother was hysterical crying, and just finished getting a bad beating from her father. And it was in regards to that my mom's dad did not like my dad because of his affiliation in organized crime. So my dad did not see eye to eye with her dad. And on this particular occasion, my mother's father went and grabbed a shotgun out of the closet. He pointed it at my father. My father was able to take the rifle out of his hand. I think he butted him, with the shotgun. I didn't beat him up or anything like that. He actually handed the shotgun back to him and said, "Don't ever do something like that again. And you cannot put your hands on Peggy anymore. Okay? Peggy is my girl. Hopefully, she's going to be my wife. And this, cannot happen." So there was a strain on the relationship for many, many, many years after they had gotten married. Um, my mom's parents um, did not really speak to, my mother or father. Wasn't until many, many, many years later when my mom's mom had gotten sick with cancer, was when they were able to try to put some things to rest from the past. And they did. They had gotten closer, which was beautiful for both my parents, especially for my mom. She needed it. Um, but yeah, so uh, they were together. They were high school sweethearts, and you know, from some stories that I heard about my dad, in Utrecht High School. Now, just so you know, Jeff, I'm new to YouTube, okay, and I am in the process with the 11th Avenue podcast, doing my research um, to try to learn more about my dad's childhood because I don't know too much. And like everybody else out there, I am like dying to know more.
Right.
So I have some cousins on my father's mother's side that I'm in the process of speaking with, and they have some stuff to share with me. And, you know, I'm going to put some of that stuff out there. I don't like to put out all the negative stuff. I mean, you can't get away from it, Jeff. You know that. You can't run from it. You can't hide it, and you certainly can't lie about it.
And
So,
that's the thing, Bill. Like that's why like here, like I don't really humanize or dehumanize any of these people. I know who they are, I know where they come from, and I know the kind of the fact that it was a different world back then. You know, you grew up and it's really, you know, like present day. You know, you see certain neighborhoods in America that are struggling to keep murders down and things like that. The reason that they're like that is because you grow up a certain way. There's only really one way you're ever going to be. You know, you either in an Italian neighborhood become a gangster, or you go and get a blue collar job and become maybe a cop or a fireman. In those days, being a gangster wasn't that crazy, especially when you lived in the area that your dad was in. I mean, he's in
yeah,
the belly of the beast. You know, there's crime families
yeah,
everywhere. They're vying for territory. I know for me, like if I lived in Brooklyn in that time, I mean, it's very likely that most of us would become very similar to what your dad became. Now, I think the one thing that kind of stood out about your dad and that I've noticed is, and even in his early life, you know, I'm talking 30s, 40s, as
mhm,
far as age, very capable individual, someone that could earn, you know, which is important in that world. But he also had that sadistic side where he was willing to go out and do things to people, and he becomes very capable, right? And during those times, you have a guy like Vic Arena who is coming up his own way in the world, and he looks
mhm,
down, you know, through some of his people and says, "Okay, what do we have here? You know, we have these guys that are they're doing things. We have these certain guys that are doing more than just certain things." And I think that was
right.
your dad. You know, and he had a quick kind of foray into the world. I mean, from what I understand, he was connected with a guy, Pasquale Amato. Do you know that name?
Yamato.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
So who
yes,
was close with Vic Arena, and that really connected them, your father and Arena, for years. You know, down the road, he would obviously side with him
yes,
in the war. And eventually, when Amato gets jammed up in '91, your father takes over that crew and
yeah,
establishes a pretty healthy group. I mean, you have Joe Colombo Jr., you have Chicky DiMartino, you have Frankie Notch, you have all these different guys.
yeah,
He's a high riser, right?
yes, yes,
He also
absolutely.
he's also in unions. He's getting involved with the Teamsters. He's a guy that can flow money up. And remember, in those times, you had some big people in the Colombo crime family. You had the Joe Scopos and the Concrete Club. You had Michael Francis, who was involved with the gas tax stuff. You
Yeah,
have people like Bill Cutolo. You know, these are the guys, you know, when we look back at the mafia, and when I really get into the mafia, it's these guys that keep the wheels turning of these families. They're not the high end bosses. They're the guys really turning the wheels on these families. And I want to ask you
yes.
about those times, you know, the 80s, you know, kind of your, you know, coming up. You know, what year were you born, by the way, Bill?
I was born in 1970.
So your dad
Uh,
was 21.
21 years old.
What
Yes.
was your childhood like?
My childhood, for the most part, it was fun. I did have a long period of innocence. When I say innocence, meaning I loved playing sports. I wasn't really getting into trouble in school. You know, maybe girl stuff or um, being a class clown. On occasions. Um, but for the most part, me growing up, I do when I think back, when I reflect back. Um, Jeff, I used to get beat a lot as a kid. You know,
When you say beat, like I remember when I was a kid. I mean, I got hit a few times. You know, I remember those. I remember
yeah.
that. When you say hit, like why? What did you do? What would happen?
Um, Sometimes it could be something as silly as me doodling on my school book. Um, for one instance, I mentioned it on a different podcast, but there was one instance that does stand out in my mind amongst a ton of others. But this particular one really stood out because, long story short, I was fighting with my sister. My mother would always take my sister's side. Okay, that's natural. So my mother at one point had just said something along the lines like, "Forgive me for cursing here, everyone.
No, go
Fuck
ahead.
you, Billy Boy. Yeah, fuck you, Billy Boy. Um, Drop that." And those were her words verbatim. And I had turned around and said to my mom, "No, you dropped that." And when my dad came home that night, I was laying in my bed, and he walked in, and I can tell that if he came in my room, usually um, if it wasn't just to say hello or good night, um, if he flipped the light on, then I knew that there was an issue.
Hmm.
So he had just said to me, "How was your day?" So on and so forth. Actually, he told me to sit at the edge of the bed first. So I did. And then he had asked me how my day was, and I was just trying to think of everything other than, what I had said to my mother that day. And so finally, he just turned around and he says, "Did you say something to your mother?" And yeah, yeah, I did. And like I didn't start by saying, "Oh, so and so started with me, so I was just defending myself or whatever." So he said, "Did you tell your mother to drop that?" Yes, yes, I did. I did. And I'm very sorry for that, but yes, I did. And so, my dad was just at that point, his sleeves were already being, rolled up, his dress shirt. And as no sooner as I had said, yes, I did say it, um, bang, I got cracked, knocked clear off the bed. And, you're told to get up. And when I say a crack, brother, I'm not just talking about a smack that you would, give your kid, maybe a smack in the face or a doink in the back of the head. I
He
mean,
hit you hard.
my yeah, my dad would hit like with a closed fist,
How old were you at the time?
Uh, at this stage, probably 12,
Now, how
12
often
years
was
old.
this happening? Was this happening a lot, or
Yeah, yeah. My dad used to also have this thing where um, he would say to me, "Would you rather the punishment, or would you rather go downstairs in the workroom?" That's what he called it, the workroom. "Would you rather go down to the workroom and, take the beating, and you don't have to worry about the punishment?" And, I had gotten to the point where I was like, I didn't want to fucking be punished and locked in the house. I was like, give me the beating, because I had gotten beatings, so many times that I wasn't afraid of the beating. Jeff, as a kid, disappointing your parent, I think hurts more than any beating that you could ever get. At least it was for me. So yeah, he would offer that up, and we would go down into the workroom, and he would have either like a cut off rubber hose. He also had like a very thick belt. Uh, it kind of mimicked like a weight lifting belt. And then also uh, there was something else that he would pick up. It was like a paddle, like a big paddle. Now the workroom where he used to take me down was maybe, I don't know, 5, 6 feet by 5, 6 feet. So there was no room to go in there. And when he would walk you in there, the door would get closed behind you and it would be locked.
what?
And the reason being,
Let me
yes.
interrupt. Why did he do this sort of thing to you? Like, what was the reasoning? But was it just to toughen you up? Was it to punish you? Did you look at it as I hate my father? Because this sounds like, this doesn't sound like just a hey, stop doing that. Don't do that again. This sounds like a very
Yeah.
sadistic individual that wants to, make his son pay regularly.
Yeah, that's a question that I've gone to therapy, Jeff, and I'm not ashamed to say it. But that is one question that I still as we're talking right now, um, have a hard time figuring out because people will make comments and say, well, Billy Jr. was a nobody. He didn't do anything in that life. There was no plans for him with his father. Now, when I think about the beatings, I look at it two ways. Um, were you beating me because you wanted to give me a beating to try to scare me away, maybe in the future, to say, like, hey, fighting like this and getting beatings like this, it's not for me? Or were you looking at it, in the back of your mind saying, I got to toughen him up,
Right.
and if he could take a beating from me, he could
Yeah.
take a beating from anybody. So and that's a question that I've wrestled with for so long because obviously I can't find out now, but it wasn't a question that I ever asked um, my dad.
But by this
But
point, this is the early 80s. Do you know what your father does for a living? Do you know who he is? Do you know, I'm always curious about that in a kid's life. We've seen it on like The Sopranos, right? A television show where the kid
yeah,
AJ learns who his father is around the same time as you're talking about here.
yeah.
What made you learn that? I'm sure he didn't come out and say, "Hey, I killed this guy today, or I did this beating today." When did you learn that? And did that was the goal for you to always go into that life as well? Did you ever have any dreams of doing anything else? Was that the only way?
Um, I wanted to go into sports. My
Like an
dad
athlete
didn't.
or
Yeah, as an athlete, I wasn't that good.
right.
Um, but my dad wasn't a sports guy, and he just flat out told me that it's a million to one shot of you making it to any of the major leagues. Um, so he's like, for you, you should stay in school. Um, I don't think that, and this is just me being honest. I don't think that um, the plans for me were to be involved in that life. At least that's what I believe today. I don't think it was until maybe the age of 15, 16, where the beating stopped. And my dad actually had threatened my mother at one point, saying, don't put your hands on my son again. Okay. So the beatings kind of stopped. But, at the age of 13, 14, you see all like the Godfather stuff that your dad, whether it was pictures, posters. Um, my dad always rooting for the bad guy in the movies. Um, and then, people coming by the house,
Yeah, who
and I
was
would
coming
see.
by during those times?
It's funny. I mentioned something about walking into Roy DeMeo's Gemini Lounge, and it was only one time. I was very young. I stopped into that lounge just for a glass of water. And the two guys that came out at first looked very familiar to me. And to be honest with you, um, as a kid, sometimes you look at people and um, you can judge them just by how they look. And these two gentlemen, they were in good shape and they were good looking guys. And I do remember them coming by the house. I'm talking about the testers. And they had kissed my dad on the cheek. I was just happened to come out of the front, and my dad was standing out front talking to them, and I just happened to see that, and I was a little perplexed. I didn't get it, but as time went on, I did have friends that, like I mentioned in the past, Mark Ferrone, who was gentleman Rudy Ferrone's son. So we did have like these little conversations, um, we met like in the fourth, fifth grade, and then we went to like middle school together. So, there was a comment that was passed to me one day from Mark. And the comment was, this is verbatim. Um, Billy, uh, we'll never have to work a day in our life.
Hmm.
And I remember saying to him, saying, "What are you talking about?" You know, well, with our dads, we're just gonna go into that life with them. And I'm like, that life. And I'm like, what kind of life are we talking about? And he's like, the mob life. And so from that time on, I started paying more and more attention, Jeff, to everything that my dad did.
Right.
How he walked, how he spoke, um, just how he carried himself. And yeah, yeah, what a good looking dude, man. What a good looking
Well,
dude.
yeah, and that's one thing what you're talking about here. I'm sure you're seeing, the way he dresses, the look, the deference he's given
Yeah,
when he goes places. These are people that this is not a random associate in the mafia. This is by this point, he's becoming a very high-ranking member of an organization. He's made by this point. And
yeah,
by the early 90s, this is a family that is in complete disarray. I mean, they go outside, they've got to worry about shooting one another. So you kind of realize, through a friend that, hey, maybe my dad's not like the mailman's uh,
the average
the
guy.
mailman or the bread guy at the corner or whatever. So your dad was, hanging out 11th Avenue, had a social club, which you now have a podcast called the 11th Avenue podcast, which we'll talk about, which is really cool. Um,
Yeah, thank
but
you.
he's coming up. He's extortion, loan sharking, unions, everything,
Yes,
everything that a mob guy does. Let me ask you one other thing about your childhood.
yes.
Were you given what you wanted? Did you live well? You obviously didn't live like you know, you weren't poor or anything, but was your dad, was he giving you things? Was he buying you things? Was it clear that you had some money? Maybe your father was well off in a way.
Um, I want to say it was probably around, and this is, I can gauge it because I do have a lot of home videos, certain Christmases, and I believe that I noticed from watching the videos back that I want to say it was around 84, 85, 86 is when our Christmases, mine and my sister's, changed.
Hmm.
Like, the gifts under the tree, were not just, 4 or 5, they were like 20, you know. Yeah. Um, but my dad, he did spoil us. When he had money, when he started really making money, um, he wasn't too shy or cheap. Whatever it was that we wanted, my dad would get for us, especially around the holidays. Um, but early on, brother, from I want to say up until we moved to 48th Street. I believe it was 1975, 76. Um, and I do remember that um, the people who, it's a long story, but the people who lived behind us happened to own the same house that we were looking to buy on 48th Street. And they were asking for an astronomical amount of money. And you know, my dad wasn't having it. And so finally, I guess words were exchanged, and this particular family happened to hear things, you know, about my dad. And they had changed their mind, and we wound up buying the
Getting
house.
a house.
Yeah. And then, the progression, it was kind of funny because the progression, as the years went on, you can tell that my dad was obviously making more money, and then obviously rising up in the family because um, we put a pool in, an in-ground pool. He built extensions on both levels of the house in the back. He built extensions in the front of the house on both levels. So for living in a moderate neighborhood, our house was the most beautiful house on the block.
And
Um,
that makes
you
sense
know,
because around this time he's really rising up in the family. He's got a lot of different ways to make money, and he's obviously spending it on you and your family and your home, and
and my
making sure.
mom, my
Yes,
mom,
sure.
yeah,
I'm sure she was. She had the furs and the stuff that women
yes,
enjoy.
hmm
But I think one of the things I'm real interested about is your early 20s, because that's around that time in the early 90s, I want to kind of make and paint the picture that Brooklyn was a war zone, okay, at that time. The Arena faction, who your dad was loyal to, Vic Arena, and the Persco faction were back and forth. Now, I want to make this clear. What I'm about to say is what the federal government alleges. I'm not saying this is true.
it's okay. Go ahead.
According to the government, Wild Bill and his crew were allegedly responsible for up to 3 murders during the Colombo War. Now, one of them had to do with a guy, Hank the Bank Schmurra, in a Dunkin' Donut parking lot. Black Sam Nastasi, who was also a Persco loyalist. And at one point, your father and Greg Scarpa, who we all have heard of, the Grim Reaper, he was on the Persco side. They hated each other. Okay. And at one point, even in November of 1991, Scarpa allegedly had a hit out on your father. I'm curious because at that age, you're what, 21, 22. What is that like
Yeah.
for you? I mean, do you know the stuff that's going on in the streets? Every young 20-year-old, obviously you're an adult at that point. You know what's going on. What was it like your dad coming home those days? Do you remember those days? What were they like?
Uh, we're speaking about in the beginning of the war.
Yeah, and even during it, the 92, 93.
Now, I was fresh out of college. Um, I had told my father that I didn't have the head for books anymore. I wasn't. I went to a 2-year college, graduated Kingsborough
Mhm.
in business management, and at graduation, I just had went over to give him a hug and a kiss, and he was very proud that day. And I literally had said to him, the question was asked of me, so where you going from here? What school? And my answer to him was verbatim. I'm like, look, Pop, I'm done with the books. I wanna earn. Um, he said, all right, so you want to get a job? And I'm like, well, I want to be with you. I want to be your guy. Was my exact words to him. And I broke his heart that day, Jeff. I truly did
You think you
because
did, really?
yeah.
So
Look, you
he,
know
in a
what?
way, really did want something more for you. He
Yes.
he maybe, I'm not saying those beatings were warranted because obviously they weren't, but
I got you.
maybe in a way he wanted to turn you off from that. He didn't want you to be like that.
I believe that because you know what, Jeff. Look, I don't care what anybody gets on YouTube or they write books and I'm not naming anybody, but you know anybody that turns around and says that, yeah, my dad wanted me in that life. Those instances are very few and far between because, if you're a dad and you love your son, you don't want them in that life. I mean, I just that's me knowing my dad. But what happened was he allowed me to come around to the club. He brought me up there. He just made me promise him and give him my word that I would listen to everything that he said. Um, he did tell me that the life is very treacherous, and that no matter what I saw him do or say, it didn't matter. I still had to listen to what he was telling me, not what I wanted to do or what I thought was right, in that life. So now my foot hits the street in the summer of 90. Um, and the war, I believe, the war started, I believe, in November of 91, I believe is when it started.
Yeah.
So, I'm still wet behind the ears, brother, for the most part. Um, so when most of the guys that were up at the club, I already knew because, since I was young, like on the weekends, on a Saturday, when my dad used to go up to the club, he would bring me up there, you
What kind of
know.
stuff were you doing there?
When I was young,
Yeah, like what were they doing? Just hanging out? What did they do?
yeah, yeah, no, just hanging out. Who had to talk to my father? Everybody would talk their schemes. Have to run it up the ladder. Uh, to my dad. But again, at a young age, you're 10, 9, 10, 11 years old, and you're seeing grown men, kiss your dad, and in those days, you see one man kiss another man, the first thing you think is, okay, they're gay, um, which
Right.
is fine. So that was like the first thing that was a little perplexing to me. Um, but so I grew up around a lot of these guys. I hate saying people's names, but I'm going to say it because, Jeff, when I do speak, whether it be on my podcast or doing an interview, is that I try to explain things, how I saw the life
Yeah,
over
sure.
20 years ago and how my brotherhood and relationships with these men. Um, I loved them like they were big brothers to me.
You didn't look at
And
them as, the people that we know them as. You didn't look at, and
no,
I've heard John Jr. talk about this. He's talked about
yeah,
how he didn't know them as what we knew. He didn't know the Joe Watts as who we knew him as. He didn't, and I don't know if he
right.
knew Joe Watts, but you know what I'm saying? Like you didn't see them as the killers that we saw them as. You mentioned you saw
No,
the Testas and you thought they were good looking guys who, were just are in
yeah,
that life.
yeah. And that's another thing that a lot of people don't understand. Like when I say that, I still have love for, let's say, a Chicky,
Right.
or Spats, or Dom, or Frankie and Joey, like all those guys, especially the guys that were in our
Your
inner
dad's age, yeah.
circle. Yeah, um, I love them. So I think I can still say, with in all honesty to you, um, first of all, that life's a business. Okay, we both can agree on that.
Sure.
So for me to still be upset with guys that may have switched sides or who were trying to kill us, over 20 years ago, I don't still carry that same animosity that I did over 20 years ago. Um, but nonetheless, I love them. And if I know this would never happen, but if they wanted to get on the phone with me tomorrow and say, "Hey, I miss you," or "Hey, let's talk about A, B, C, and D and reminisce a little bit," I would. Um, so the way the public sees a lot of these guys, because of what they read and what they learn, um, people say, "Well, how can, for instance, how can you be friendly with Larry Mazza?" Well, why shouldn't I be? You know, we
Right.
we both had orders. It was a job, and here we are. We came out the other side over 20 years later.
Well,
So why shouldn't I be?
what's so weird about that is just because like even into the 2000s, like your dad, even before the 2000s, in the 90s, after the war ended, they didn't continue to hate each other. They eventually just
No,
had like a peace treaty and everybody moved on. And I think that's
strange.
Yeah.
Strange.
Yeah, like it just kind of was normal. Like you move on and you I'm sure you knew people on that side. You grew up in Brooklyn. Like
Yeah, I did.
that's yeah.
I did. Yeah, I
Yeah,
did.
so it all moves on eventually. But it's a wild time in Brooklyn, the 90s. The bullets are flying, bodies are dropping on both sides. And the chief people on both sides, as far as hitters are concerned, are Gregory Scarpa and your father's
My
crew.
dad.
Whether we sugarcoat it or not, Chicky DiMartino was a murderer. Frank Nietzsche was a murderer. These are guys that were tasked to carry out hits for the family. It's pretty simple. Now, you had a comment at one point, a quote about your father, quote, he seemed invincible. Do you agree? Do you believe that? Because it seemed like he was. I mean, he had all these wild times, really in a matter of a year or two. He was out there putting work in, right? Did
Yes.
he really seem
Yes.
invincible?
You know, there was a reference that they used to refer to my dad as what was the name of that mad monk that they tried to kill? The monk. He was a monk, a literal monk.
I'm not
Um,
sure.
I can't think of his name, but they tried to kill him like 6 or 7 times, and he would never die. He was shot. They stabbed him. They tried to poison him. Uh, oh
He's
my
almost
God!
immortal. We could say.
And yeah, and that's how I felt because I did know that Greg was a serious cat in the street.
Absolutely.
So I just kept thinking to myself that, hey, you guys keep trying to get to him and get to him, but you guys can't. Um, so, and then once he beats his case, yeah, man,
You really
I
thought
thought,
it.
I truly thought that this man was invincible, for
And I'm going
real.
to get into the case, but I have to ask you because it's kind of an interesting
Yes.
conversation. It's fascinating because a lot of us don't. We know about the Gaudis and stuff, but some of this stuff is kind of kind of unearthed to a lot of people. When
Hmm.
you were younger, was there one of those guys that when you saw him on the street, you were just kind of freaked out by? Was there anyone you ever met in that world that creeped you out, scared you? Like, was Greg Scarpa that guy? Because obviously, if you've seen him, like he has very that look, right? I've heard people mention that Neil Delacroix had it, or Carmen Galante had it, that gleam, that he just looked like
My
a
dad
psycho.
had it.
He
It's funny
did.
you said that. My
Interesting.
dad, he had that look, man, especially during the war, brother. I saw a side of my father that even through the years of me getting beatings, I never saw.
Wow.
Um, and it was dead eye look that um, it would send chills up my spine. But to try to think of anyone that I've come across in the street, um, now fear, no, but have a distaste for. Um, Greg was one of them. Carmine Sessa was another. But it was only because of
The sides.
stories that I have heard, in the past, especially from my dad. Um, you know, killing a woman,
Right.
that Mrs. Barry,
Sure.
which comes up a lot. Um, that's the type of creepy feeling that you get sometimes when you're around some guys.
Yeah.
But
I think I know
but
what you're
not
talking about. These
yeah, but never
Sure.
fear of them being too crazy. Especially for me, I always looked at guys this way. Um, you know, I was in good shape. I was able to handle myself. I always felt like there's nobody out there that can beat me up. That's how I felt. Especially when you have someone like your dad as your backing, um, you feel even more um, bigger than what you were, to be honest.
Sure,
So
sure. Yeah, I guess I kind of understand what you're saying with kind of that, they have the ability to kill a woman. These depraved people. Like there weren't that many in the mob. Like a lot of them were just doing a job. Their job is to kill people, and that's what they did. But then you have those
yeah,
folks that killed women. They killed innocent people, the
Hmm.
Cassos, the Scarpas, the real
Yeah.
depraved people.
Yeah.
Um, so ultimately, the war would end by 94. Vic Arena's arrested. Scopo's killed. He's the final person killed in the war, and it ends. And the feds would kind of pull out across the curtain and see what they had left. The who was
Right.
responsible for what. By kind of that time, your father and his crew are indicted. Right. A lot of the
Yes.
evidence, actually, from what I know, came from Greg Scarpa himself. There was a lot of evidence that he was given. He was feeding them information really from, as we know, the 60s, but a lot of info from the late 80s on. And, he would mention at one point that he heard your father, talking about loan shark debtors, murder conspiracies. Like he was feeding them a lot of this information. Um,
Yeah.
do you remember the day your father got pinched, and what did that mean to you? What did that do to you?
Um, do I recall the exact day he got arrested? I'm gonna honestly tell you no. I really don't recall that day. Um, I'm
Did you feel
sorry,
like the
what you
man of the
call?
house, though?
Yes, I did, and that's me just being perfectly honest with you. But that was a pressure that I feel that I put on myself. I don't feel that it was. The only thing I was told is to make sure that I'm there for my mother. Um, I have a stepsister, to be there for her, um, to be there for her mom as well. Um, so I don't really recall the day he got arrested because from the day that he had gotten arrested, I knew that my life was never going to be the same.
Sure.
You know, it was it was a it was a fast forward in that life that I can't say I wasn't ready for it, because we already went through the war. Um, but seeing my father facing these charges, knowing that um, he could definitely go away for life, um, there was a lot of added pressure uh, on me. I at least I maybe I put more pressure on myself, I should say. Um, but yeah, I it did feel good in a way, um, to be present, especially for my mom during her difficult times dealing with this stuff. Then she was dealing with some personal issues with my dad as well at the time. So it did feel good. It felt good to be around for my sisters. So as a trying time as it was, I just knew that I just kept telling my dad, like he would call the Hotel Gregory, let's say on a Friday night. He knew what time I would be there, so on and so forth. And he would just tell me, hey, you're doing a great job out there. Behave yourself, you know, be careful. And he would just reiterate to me that, just continue to be there for your mom. That was the most important thing for him.
Well, when we would find out that your father and the other members of the Colombo crime family that were in prison at the time at MDC had quite the time in there. They housed them all together, which is a
Yeah.
wild decision by the Bureau of Prisons and the warden. There was some interesting stories coming out of MDC that they had their own section. They had basically taken it over. Your dad was a real leader. I think that's one thing that we can sufficiently take from all of this. People listened to what he said. And again, he was a very powerful person from a word standpoint. People listened when he spoke. And I always found that to be very interesting. He was the one that people went to for guidance. And then
Yes.
on the street, he had to make sure that his family was put together. I want to ask you something that I thought I heard, and I actually didn't know. You mentioned a stepsister. And forgive me, Bill. I'm not trying to be
Mhm.
disrespectful in any way.
No, no, not at
Was
all.
that a girlfriend that your father had?
Um,
What went on there that you know of?
yes, it was his girlfriend, but they were together for a very, very, very long time. And
Now your
they
mother,
had
what she obviously, old school woman,
um,
she just dealt with it.
um, without going in too
Yeah,
deep
no
into it.
problem.
When my dad was in prison, what happened was, after a while, after you get a certain amount of letters and cards and stuff from people, eventually you send that stuff home for keepsakes. So my dad was doing that, sending home cards and letters back to my mom, and then he was sending cards and letters back to, forgive me just saying girlfriend, it's
That's
only
fine.
because
You
I
don't got to
don't
bring your
want
name
to,
up.
yeah, I don't want to put her name out there.
No problem.
Um, but anyway, so what the prison did purposely
Oh no,
was, yep, they
sent them.
switched it. Yep, they switched it, and my mother got all the letters and pictures, and
Wow.
I was included in some of these pictures
Oh
that my
no.
mother saw with, my dad's girlfriend
She
and my
wasn't happy with
sister.
you either, I would think.
Yeah, that it broke her heart. It literally broke her heart. But she understood, and with me, um, my mom used to call me Billy Boy. She's like, Billy Boy, I know that you were doing what you were told to do.
Sure.
So it's not your fault. And then, his girlfriend, my sister's mom, she was very broken as well, because no wife or girlfriend wants to, see that stuff, you know. So in the prison, it was kind of, forgive me here, it was fucked up what they did. Like you're fucking with families, like there's no reason for it.
Hmm.
But in regards to when they were in prison, in the Brooklyn house, yeah, they did run the prison. I mean, it's I'm not laughing because it was right.
Well, it is
I
fair.
think,
It is actually fairly funny, honestly. It,
yeah,
it almost was like they make it look like in the films where the gangsters have their own wings and they're told
yeah,
they tell people what to do. It's kind of funny in a way.
yeah. But yeah, that's also a good way to start a whole racial war too.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
but it didn't happen, and yeah, the news ran with it, and I guess we could laugh about it now, but I don't think that would happen in today's day.
Yeah, and I heard a quote about your mom. If we could just say one thing, according to a law enforcement official, she was a very gutsy lady. He said, and she actually had a quote about your father. Quote: Even after she had learned that he had a daughter with another woman, she remained faithful to him. She said, "I forgave him because my love is greater than all that. I knew he would
Yes,
want to see his daughter. I told him to go see his daughter at any time at their house, at her house."
that's
So
true.
I think I always sadden myself when I think of the families of the people that I talk about because they don't ask for this stuff. Okay. A lot of the time, especially the women, the daughters of these people, the wives of these people, they obviously know who their husbands are. They do what they can to shield their children from it. But I always
Yes,
find your mother to be quite a fascinating woman just because that's not easy for a woman, right? Especially a woman that had been with a man for so many years to say, I know that you found a reason for whatever to want to go out and be with someone else. But I'm going to put my feelings aside because that's what a mother does. And I'm going to think about my kids
yeah,
and I'm going to think of that little child that was born that she doesn't have any, she has no, uh, she doesn't know who she's born to. She's just born, right? And
yeah.
I always found your mom to be yeah, very fascinating from that standpoint. She seemed like a great woman, really.
My mom didn't mince words, and
Yeah,
obviously, like I said, she found out about this while he was in prison. And just to give you even a better idea of the type of woman she was, um, she would still. I was going to see my dad definitely 3 times a week, sometimes four. And I would bring his clothes back and forth, for court and stuff. And my mom always made sure that his shirt was pressed. Uh, she would put matches tie, handkerchief, shoes were polished. The shoes I would take care of. Um, but my mom had turned around at one point and just said to my dad, Billy, we could always talk about this when you come home. Right now, I want you to focus on your case.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, my mom was pissed. She was
I would
pissed,
bet.
but she was able to, um, for the most part, keep it to herself. I mean, she would vent, to myself, my sisters, and stuff, but she did not cloud his mind when it came to fighting the trial. Um,
That's
and
amazing.
and then also for my baby sister's mom. She's another one that's a very, very strong woman, um, who, again, very classy woman as well, because um, she was very upset for my dad and for my mom when she found out about what happened with the stuff being sent to the house.
It sounds like.
So yeah, she was a very classy lady, and my baby sister is just beautiful. Haven't spoken to her in a while, but we follow each other on
Mhm.
social media. And if you look at her, Jeff, her and my dad, it's one face. Like
They look alike, right?
it's, oh my God, it's like, and mind you, my other two sisters, I can't say looked like my dad at all.
At all, right?
So,
It's
and
interesting
that's not
how,
a slight. I don't mean it as a slight. I just
yeah,
mean it in a sense where, you know, yeah, my
it's
baby
interesting how
sister,
genes work in like kids. Like
right?
some kids look just like their family. Some kid, like I don't look anything like my
Yeah.
brother, sister, and my family. I just don't, and that's
Mhm.
it's just weird how that works. I
Mhm.
want to ask you one thing, on
Yes.
kind of that subject. While your father's away, what kind of things are you doing? Are you doing anything in the street at this point? Are you taking care of operations? What kind of things are you doing? Because you're really one of the
Well,
only people out there for him, right?
yeah. Jackie was out there. A gentleman by the name of Joe Campy was out there.
You're talking about
Um,
Jackie DeRoss, right?
that's Jackie, yeah. And then also Joe Campy,
Hmm.
he was out there. So between the three of us, we held shit together. I mean, we looked to Jackie, for advice, of course, and certain rulings and stuff like that. But for the most part, we all held together. Um, but my life became very hectic. Um, like trying to, like I said, go on visits 3, 4 times a week, and then on each visit, I believe it might have been 2 hours or 2.5 hours. I believe it was. But I would walk into a visit, whether it be with my mother or with my sister's mom, uh, and my dad would sit there and talk to me for like 2 hours of the visit. And brother, I don't know uh, if you can relate, but to go and sit there a couple of times a week and uh, just have him talking to you, and mind you, we would talk with our hands covering our
Yeah,
mouths.
right.
My dad would also make like little crib notes on a little piece of paper. He would write very small. He would write in code where only I would understand it. He would tuck it under his cheek and gum. And then during the visit, if we were eating potato chips and whatnot, he would just drop it into the bag. I would grab it, make believe like I'm eating the chip, and then take it and stick it into underneath my gum and lip. And then I would get to the car. Actually, I would drive away from the prison first, and the first chance I got, I would pull over because a 2 hour visit, and your dad is saying one thing after the
You
other
don't
to
want to
you about
forget. Right.
you can't forget, and you can't fuck up the messages, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
So, and then there were times that I would look at some of his crib sheets and be like, okay, I
Can't read
can't
it.
make this out. Yeah, on a couple of occasions, it got better as the 13 months passed. Um, but yeah, it was a lot for me. It truly was, brother, because again, I'm a young guy, but I, I felt very old already in that life. Um, I felt like I was thrown to the wolves, and I didn't have a choice but to learn and to trust. You know, I had to
Right.
trust Jackie. I had to trust my brother Joey Camp, to know that they knew enough about that life, and they would school me. And I would go see Jackie sometimes 3, 4 times a week, and you know, people think that I have a hatred. I don't carry hate around with me, Jeff. I mean, the days have passed. You know what I mean? It's over 20 years. Um, will you carry like a little bit of a callus for certain people? Yeah, you will. Um, but for the most part, um, I I don't wish harm on anyone. I truly don't. Not at this stage of my life. Um, and then I'm also someone that believes in reform. You know, so if someone made a mistake over 20 years ago, within reason of certain
Right.
things, um, I truly feel that they deserve a shot to come home. Now, who am I to try to stand in the way of that, or to try to hold these things against certain men? Because, Jeff, look, and for everyone that listens to things that I say, um, there was a huge part of my life where I was in denial and I was being very hypocritical. And it wasn't until, me doing a lot of self reflection and realizing that, you know, um, my dad had put other sons, other
Sure.
families in the same position that I and my family were in.
Right.
Um, and it took a long time for me to digest that. Um, but it is what it is,
Right.
So who am I to sit here and to keep being angry um, with people because we lived a certain life that we both know that that's part of the life, you know?
Hmm.
Um, I didn't want to see my father get killed, but
Well, yeah,
we,
and that's kind of where I want to go with all this. So by 94, eventually your father gets out of jail. He's acquitted of his case. He gets out, goes back to the streets. By this point, the Colombo crime family's past the murky waters. Mush Russo, little alley boy Persico are kind of in control of the family. Eventually, Mush
yes,
Russo in 96 goes to jail. Little Allie's acting boss. Now, remember, his father's still alive. Carmine Persico still wants to have control of his family, puts the
yes,
kid in control. And in a show of faith, because again, your father by this point is one of the highest ranking people in the family. He's very powerful. He's a leader. From good faith, he kind of says, you know what, Bill, you're a guy. You're gonna make underboss. You're my second in command at this point. And I think the Perskos, as we know from history, they were not ones that wanted to relinquish power. They never wanted to put the family
yeah,
in the hands of anyone else. And what do we know about Mush Russo even? Mush was the cousin of them. So it was all a family affair. So he's made underboss. He's very powerful by this point. And
hmm
I think people start to realize, especially Alley Boy, when he gets arrested and goes away, that you look at people like Jackie DeRoss, all these people are starting to believe that your father is a big threat, right? He's the
yes,
one that could probably be the one guy to grab leadership away from the Persico group and take it under his own wing. He was a leader, as I said. Did you, by 98, 99, and I want to also say your father by this point had become a very religious individual, from what I understand. He, from what I heard, he went to a parish in Staten Island. He's very respected in that parish. One parishioner said that he was one of the gleaming people in the parish. Basically, he was giving to leukemia societies. He was a charitable individual. It seems like something had come over him. Maybe the the fact that, he was probably faced death so many times, he wanted to make right on something, or maybe he saw his own demise at some point and wanted to make good on it. Did you start to realize at some point though that life is treacherous, as you talked about? Did you think at some point that something would happen to him, and did he know that, do you think?
Um, Once he beat the case, um, we did have a couple of conversations where I was asking, um, so let me get this straight. Everything that went on for those 2 years, all the guys that got hurt and who wound up in jail, whatever, um, it's all forgotten about. Now, that was very strange to me,
Right.
So he said yes, for the betterment of the family. I took a soldier position, not a captain's position, not an underboss position, but a soldier position. Um, and I'm doing it for the family, Willie. Um, Now, I think in my dad's eyes, he probably knew that him just being a soldier was probably not going to be too long, because he was an earner and very well liked by a lot of people in that family. So,
You're talking
um,
about his demotion, and then they kind of pick him up and say, you know what, we're going to put you back up. That's
yes. But, getting back to what you were saying, I think my dad, um, I feel that my dad, he kind of alluded this with me um, when he put a huge statue of the Blessed Mother in his backyard. And he would go out there every morning and do his prayers. But, you know, I think that my dad had made somewhat of a promise, or maybe an agreement, if you will, with God, saying that I'm going to be a better person or a better guy. Maybe he didn't want to resort maybe to violence anymore or stuff like that. Um, so I do feel that his faith um, may have had something to do with maybe why he let his guard down.
so you're
Um,
saying in a roundabout way, and I don't again mean to be disrespectful. Do you
no, no,
feel he
no.
maybe got a little soft?
Um,
He wasn't as, his guard wasn't as up, right? He wasn't
yeah,
as sharp, let's say. He kind of maybe let other people who maybe were bad people, he let them get the best of him maybe a little. Do you
yeah,
think that's fair?
yes, very,
And
very.
let's be real. I think we all look back on the writing on the wall and say when he gets the underboss tag, they were doing it out of, hey, let's just try to make him happy. I think, and I've talked about this before. One of the most fascinating things about the mob today, as opposed to this time that we're talking about, is the people that were in the mob back then, the people that came up in the 70s and the 80s,
Mhm.
and we've heard John Gotti talk about this. There's only one way out in that world. Okay, you would die for what you believe in. This is what we're about. This is who we are. There's no other way out. Okay, you either go to jail or you die. It's pretty simple. There's no other end. And I think your
Yeah,
dad, in a way, like I said, kind of realized his own demise would come eventually, and he wanted to make peace in any way he could. And I've actually talked about this in a video I did where I related as well to like other religions, right? So like there are Islamic groups, right? Whether it be
mhm,
terrorists or anybody, they believe that what they're doing is a noble cause, right? And they believe that when they die, as long as they're faithful to Allah or God or whoever, that they'll be taken care of. And I think maybe your dad said, you know what, I've done a lot of bad things probably, but maybe if I just have a relationship, I can get something back here. And when my time comes to go wherever I go, they'll remember that. And I think there's something kind of interesting about that too. It's, Your father seemed like a really fascinating cat, really. I mean, especially in these times.
Yeah. Um, you know, there's a couple of things that I learned over the course of life, especially growing up in that life or being born into that life. Um, First of all, I feel that you can not get married because, from what I've seen and what I've learned over the course of my life, that this life, or I should say that life, the street life, it tears families apart from the inside out,
Right.
in every aspect. So I don't feel that you can be married in that life. I certainly feel that you shouldn't have children if you are serious about that life. Now, that's not going to change. The life is never going to die. It's always going to be around. Maybe it's not as big or whatever you want to call it, but it's always going to be around. And I'm sure for the rest of time, as that life still exists, guys are still going to get married. Guys are still going to have children. And it's like a hamster wheel of turmoil. Um, So, as far as I'm concerned, uh, my dad must have felt extremely lucky, because no one thought that they had a shot in hell to beat that case. And I'm one of them. I was one of those people, because I know how the FBI works.
Yeah, they don't
Uh,
lose much
nope, they don't lose. They don't like to
to lose.
lose.
Right.
Um, and uh, and in my particular case, things didn't always work out so smooth with them because of exactly a couple of things of what we just said. Um, especially when they're gunning for you, and if they want you, they're gonna do whatever they need to and whatever they can to get you.
Well, they have all the resources, right? I mean, it's hard to fight a
Yeah,
war against someone that never runs out of ammunition, guns,
that's
whatever.
right.
So I wanna before we get into what would ultimately happen with you and everything, I want to talk about the day that your father was killed. And I a lot of this has to and it does straightforwardly come from the individual that pulled the trigger that day, who we've talked about on this channel, we've talked about on this show. This individual, Dino Calabro, who look, if we're talking about lunatics over the last 20 years in the American Mafia, we could put him up very high. He was a depraved human being. He killed a lot of people. He was a hitter. It's that simple, young hitter. Um, he would state that, according to him, Tommy Shots Joelli told him what to do, that they were supposed to off your father. And that came directly from Ali Schatz and DeRoss. Now, DeRoss was close to your dad, as you alluded to. Um, now, I want to talk about the fact that the federal government was tailing your father that day. Um,
Yes.
According to the last person that saw him, they saw him in the area of 92nd and Shore Road in Brooklyn. He's
Yes.
picked up. He's taken to a home in the area of 1900 76th Street in Bensonhurst, which tree line street, very residential. But that
Yep.
was the place that Dino Calabro's cousin, little Dino Saraceno, lived, and they would off people at that home. And from what Calabro talks about, your father walks up, they ask where Alley Boy is, they lead him down, and that's where it's done. Okay. We're not going to get into the particulars. There's no reason to. He was killed that day. Now, for a long period of time, you thought your father was, dumped. No one knew where he was. Eventually, through other cases, people start getting picked up. Most notably, the Ross, Little Alley Boy was already picked up. Tommy
Mhm.
Shots got picked up in the 2000s as well as Dino Calabro. Now, Calabro decides out of all three of these individuals, he wants to speak. Because remember, Calabro had been involved with killing a cop. Let's just be honest with
Those.
ourselves here.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ralph Doles, which we've talked about on this channel as well. Calabro had a
Mhm.
lot weighing on him. He'd killed a lot of people. He was a chief killer for a long time. He starts talking about your dad. Now, I want to talk about the day after the disappearance, and your dad disappears. Um, Jackie DeRoss would come to the home of your mother. He would claim that he was looking for the books for the family. Your dad was the one that handled that sort of thing, and he was looking for money. Your mother would also say that he, quote, showed no remorse and or concern for your father, which she found to be pretty odd. She would also state that that day that he went missing, Bill called her and mentioned that he had a meeting with, quote, the kid, who we would refer to as little Alley Boy Persico, which makes sense. And we mentioned that the witness saw him. Um, what do you know about that day? How, obviously, what did you know? What did you hear about the DeRoss meeting at your home?
Well, first of all, Jackie did come by the house on a few occasions. Um, his condolences, forgive me, uh, sounded hollow. Um, for me, I
So
wasn't
you heard
buying
them
it.
directly.
Yeah,
What did he
yeah.
say? Do you know? You
Uh,
remember?
just things along the lines like, something must have came up. Um, he must have got a tip. Maybe he took off. We'll be hearing from him soon, I'm sure. He would say all things along those lines. Um, my mother was not afraid. Like I said to you earlier, she never minced words. Um, and she had uh, at one point turned around and said, you know, Jackie, what do you think? I'm stupid. I know you got my husband's position. I know how it works.
Right.
And but my mother did testify to the fact that she did speak to my dad that day, which that very evening I was trying to uh, get a timeline from her. Like, when was the last time you spoke to Daddy? I said, because I said I was paging him. I was, trying not to scare her. So I just said I was paging him a few times. He never showed up to the club. So I'm thinking maybe he just got tied up, or, you know, maybe he got a tip that he was going to get pinched and, landed for the day just to see what was going down. And she could not recall the time. Now, this is back in 1999. My mother's testimony, I believe, was 2008, maybe. I
Yeah.
think that was the last time. Um, but one thing I can say, my dad never spoke on the phone. Now, I don't mean like, hey, hon, what do you need from the store? I love you. I miss you. I don't mean stuff like that. But when it came to
Family
anything
matters.
organized crime, my dad would never say something like that over the phone that I'm going to meet the kid. Now, I don't know if maybe my mother, all those years later, maybe she, I don't know, misunderstood something or whatever the case may be. But I do know that my dad would never say something like that over the phone.
Well, let me ask
Now,
you. Let me ask you
yeah,
one other thing here. She would also say that at one point, quote, some of it was above my stove and some of it was in the attic. And she's talking about up to what she says $1.5 million. She would also
yeah.
say that she took records and burned them in a metal garbage pail in her backyard. And she would also state
Mhm.
that, quote, my husband told me that if anything ever happened to him, you give nothing up. So,
Well, that was said to me,
right.
whether my dad said it to her or not, I'm not going to call her a liar,
Sure.
not my mom.
Yeah,
But I
absolutely.
do know that that was said to me. But if it was said to her, my mom was turning the money over. It wasn't until I stopped her. Jackie had come by the house. It was one night, it was pretty late. And my mother didn't know that this money was under the stove just yet. It was over the stove, an event, and that's where most of the cash was, among other places. And then what was up in the attic was um, like money that he would put aside for, let's say, guys that were in jail, sending money over to the families.
Right.
He would keep his union pay. Um, it was just like a little lockbox. That's
Right.
all it was, a little
Money for a
lockbox.
rainy day. Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But not a lot of money in there, brother, at all. So my mother goes upstairs, and she asks me to come with her. We go, and we go up into the attic, and this box was kept in like a sewing machine bag. And my mother, we're up there with a flashlight, and my mother is taking all the envelopes out of the box, and she's throwing it, into a bag. And I'm like, wait, what are you doing? She's like, well, he wants the money, so, let's, put it together, we'll give it to him. I'm like, no. I'm like, Daddy's rule was, if verbatim, if anything ever happened to him, fuck them and give them nothing.
Absolutely.
So as my mother's throwing all, the money into the bag, I'm going into the bag and taking it out. And she keeps grabbing the same thing and she keeps throwing them back in the bag again. I'm like, Mom, stop. I'm like, throw in a couple of little envelopes. I said, and that's where we'll go from there. So I just turned around and said, um, I'll handle it. Don't worry. I says, I'll go downstairs. So next thing, we go downstairs. I'm carrying this sewing machine bag. And Jackie's like, all right, Buff. He used to call me Buff. He's like, you hop in your car. He's like, you follow me. And, when we get to my house, I'll take the bag off you. Now, I was trying to come up with a reason not to go. I was just like, no, just take the fucking bag. What do you
Were
need
you
me for?
worried they were going to kill you?
Yeah, well, worried, not worried, but the thought of me getting clipped, yeah, because the first thing I'm thinking is this. They get their hands on the records, which is protocol. Just so you know, Jeff, a lot of people, I've heard comments over the last couple of weeks where people would say things along the lines like, if that guy came by my house and he was knocking on walls and floors and asking, listen, it's protocol in that life that if someone goes to jail for life or they wound up dying or they get killed, that stuff is supposed to be kicked back over to the family, especially the records. And I felt that it was twofold, actually threefold. My mother was afraid of me holding on to the records because she felt that as soon as I turned over the records, she felt that they were going to kill me. Because, in that life, once you kill the father, and Jackie had said this to me, um, the day I went to go kill him on Bay Street, yeah. Um, he's like, Buff, what are you going to do? Shoot me right here in broad daylight? He's like, look, I saved you. This is verbatim. I saved you. Buff, back in the day, when the father goes, the son goes. I'm like, and that's when I had turned around and said,
You knew.
you made two mistakes then. You killed my father, but you didn't kill me.
Right. And
And
that's a
that's,
quote. That's a quote I was going to ask you about. And this is a guy, I think it's important to say, like, this was a guy that was very close to your dad. I mean, your dad was the best man at his wedding. I mean, he was Jackie DeRossi, your dad were very close. And that's the deceit and the treachery that there are no real friends in that world, right?
no,
When the guy up top, whether it be Little Alley Boy or whether it be Carmine, when they say, hey, look, he needs to go, he needs to go, and it doesn't matter if you've been lifelong friends. That's the truth. And I want to mention your quote. You actually would say at one point, put me in an alley with both of them and I'll send them out in bags. They're nothing but cowards. You would say that about Cutolo and Little Alley Boy. I kind of want to put a bow on them just
oh,
quickly.
you mean Jackie, in regards to Jackie and Allie, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I just want to put a bow on those guys quickly. They would get pretty short sentences in 2001, but ultimately Persico and Jackie DeRoss would both be indicted for the hit on your father. His body would be found in 2008 after the testimony of obviously Calabro. In 2007, both Jackie DeRoss and Persico would be convicted and both got life in prison. Jackie DeRoss is 85 years old. He is still alive. And I do know certain people that were inside with him. They said he is still ornery than ever. And he is at Springfield Federal Medical Center. Alibay Persico is 68 years old and is still alive as well. And he is at McKean in Pennsylvania. They will neither get out ever. I guess I'll ask you, Bill. You've made comments. You were on a show on MTV called Families of the Mafia. Your family and you, and you talked about at one point that you had considered writing a letter to the case of DeRoss. I'll ask, why? What on earth would you have to do anything as far as nice to him? You ultimately would decide, Bill, that after your father was killed, you did decide to speak to the government. You basically believed that you wanted to get back at these individuals for doing what they did. That was your dad. I think in one way it is honorable to whether it's you're not going to kill these people. Obviously, now you could have went in and jabbed them in the head and killed them both, and I don't think anyone would blame you for it. But you know that you had kids, you had a wife, and you decided to go another way with it. Did you ever consider just and I'd like you to be honest if you're willing, did you ever consider saying, "You know what? I'm not gonna cooperate. I'm gonna just kill these motherfuckers because that's what they deserve."
Yes, that was that very night. My wheels were spinning. Um, the strange part about that night that my dad disappeared was that everybody was acting as if, kind of like as if like my dad never existed. It was
Right.
very
They move on
strange.
so quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that night my wheels were spinning. Um, I felt that this would have to come out of our own backyard. Um, I did know that my dad was very well liked by the other families, for the most part, and I know that no one would have had to make a move like that against my dad, unless it came out of our own backyard. Um, so yes, uh, the next couple of days. Um, Yeah, I went after Jackie. Um, but at the last moment, when I realized, um, my dad used to have a saying. He said to me on more than one occasion, verbatim, really, any monkey could pull a trigger, but it takes that much more of a man to reach his hand out and help a man up. And in that moment, when I went to go kill Jackie, um, I kind of looked at him and he kind of looked helpless
Wait,
because,
so you're hold on a second. So you're saying you very much were going to do that. You believed you could
yeah,
kill him? You believed it? You were willing to do it.
he was dead, bro. He was
Wow.
dead. Like he had nothing on him. He was naked.
So
You
you could have
know,
got him right there.
I was geared up. Yeah, I had him. I literally had him. Um, but when I realized how easy it was,
You felt it was
that's
too
when
easy. He deserves more.
Yeah, well, I don't know about deserves more at that moment, but I did realize how easy it was. And then the other part was this. I knew that I couldn't bring my father back, and
Right.
I felt like the Colombo family already took what they wanted from my family already,
Hmm.
and I had a realization in the moment that um, if I do this now, knowing that I can't bring my father back, what does that say about me in regards
Yeah,
to my wife and child at that
absolutely.
moment?
Right.
I couldn't let them have another member of our family, and that's how I felt in that, in those moments.
And that's why like I don't we see nowadays on YouTube, there are a lot of people that come on here that were informants. A lot of them are they have no remorse. They did what they did. There's really no reason. They have excuses. You're the one very insular case that I find interesting because I look at my own life again. And I told you this before we got on the air. If I were you and my father was killed in that way, and there was absolutely no concern, they just moved on like nothing else happened. My father was who he was. He was this guy that was everyone liked, as you alluded to. He wasn't out there making waves. He was doing stuff. He was someone that, albeit was a gangster, but he was a guy that did what he had to do. He never hurt nobody as far as in the family. I would probably say, if I were in your position, I would have done the same thing as far as that's why when people talk negatively about you, I'm always kind of, I don't get it because I think we have to put ourselves in that position. This wasn't some like friend of yours. This was your father. This was this was the guy who made you, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But and I get what you're saying there, where you have kids. If you didn't have kids and a wife, you probably would have taken the other way, wouldn't you have?
Yes.
Absolutely. You had that much animosity. And I don't think any of us blame you. I guess the question I have is you've come a long way since then. That was a long time ago. That was the late 90s. You think about how much the world has changed. We think about the people that were directly involved with this case, like DeRoss. Think of all that time that's passed, and he has sat in a jail cell. He's gotten old in a jail cell. As I said, you had considered, I guess, not burying the hatchet, but writing a letter. Why? What would want you to? Why would you want to have him feel any sort of? Was you just thinking of his family? Why would you want him to
Um,
feel any happiness?
well, people might find this a little strange,
I will
or
admit I
maybe
do, honestly.
maybe hard to understand. There's more of a backdrop to what went down in regards to Wild Bill. Um, I want to say this and try to be as kind as I possibly could be here. Um, with Jackie, I was hurt. Like I was hurt because I knew Jackie from childhood,
Right.
and I grew up loving the man. So, in regards to him, early on, um, I didn't feel bad for him. Now, Jackie is considerably older than Allie. Now,
17 years
I,
old.
yes, and I do know how that life works, and I do know what gaslighting is. And I will delve deeper into this. Forgive me, Jeff, here on the 11th Avenue podcast eventually.
Yeah, and I
Um,
want people before you do, I want people to go check that out. I'm a lot of the creators in this space I don't follow. I think a lot of the stories are just we've heard before. But as I said, yours is very interesting. And I want people to go check out. I'm going to put the link in the description to the show. Go subscribe. Go check it out. As you can see, and I'll say this, Bill, we've been on for about an hour and a half. This is probably one of the more enlightening pieces of content I've ever done. I find it to be very interesting. You're really offering something that we just don't really hear much. And I know, like I said, I feel like you've definitely changed a lot as far as the kind of guy that you are, and you just kind of entertaining. And it almost makes me think. I remember locally where I live now, Bill. About 10 years ago, a individual walked into an Amish schoolhouse and killed little children. I don't know, maybe you heard about it. And I remember the week after this happened, the Amish people in my community that live not far from me forgave this person, right? And I think back and I thought, how could you forgive that dude? He walked in and killed your daughter, little children. And I'm not relating that to you in any way, but I always found people that are so willing to forgive. And it seems like you truly have come a long way as far as the kind of guy that you are, the fact that you do seem to be at peace with your decision. You did, in a way, get back at the people, but you now often look at them as just like figures of they were just part of a life that is kind of nonsense in the end. And do you just want to see them see some happiness? Is that kind of what you're
Uh,
getting at?
yeah, Jackie, like you said, is about 85 years old now.
Yeah,
I
it's all.
would, it would make me, um, feel a little better if the man was able to go home and see his grandchildren and see his wife and children. And then in Allie's case, Allie is a lot younger. I feel that he's been in there for over 20 years now, or just about 20 years. Um, and, you know, when it comes to making a difference between Jackie and Allie, Allie Boy was never around my dad from the time that Jackie was.
Right, so it didn't
Okay.
mean as much, I guess.
Yeah. So if you ask me, in my personal opinion, if this was solely Allie's decision, I don't buy that. I don't buy it. Unless you have people saying to you, the wild man's gonna take over the family. You gotta act. You gotta act. And I'm here to tell you, Jeff, my dad was not looking to take over the family because we had conversations about that.
Right. I don't believe it
He,
either.
yeah, he didn't need the money and he didn't want that bullseye on his back.
Well, let me ask you something. And
Hmm.
this is again just a theory. Okay, I'm
Hmm.
not. I'm not making any statements because this individual, Tommy Schatz, was cleared of this murder. The government felt that he had nothing to do with it, even though the actual killer, Dino Calabro, stated that he did. Dino Calabro, by the way, is on the street. He did 11 years and is a free man. The individual that actually pulled the trigger is on the street. Now, I have a theory on Tommy Schatz, who, if you know anything about Tommy Schatz Joeli, he has come up he was a Persco guy his whole life. He had been very
Okay.
close with Mush Russo. He was a staunch Persco guy, right?
Yeah.
The writing was on the wall. Little Alley Boy was going to go to jail, right? Jackie DeRoss, I mean, I've always thought that him and Joeli had something to do with this. They were the ones that, because I think Joeli would have been the guy if these two aren't around, either him or DeRoss. And I think they were in unison in belief that they believed your dad was going to take over. I think Tommy Schatz has more to do with it than let on. Now, again, just a theory. What do you think about him? Do you were you blown away that he was free to that thing?
Well, that's what brings me back to your earlier question. Um, why would you want to write a letter
Yeah,
to help a man come home from prison because the guy who actually, I'm going to split hairs here. But my concern, even 20 years ago, my main concern was I wanted the guy whose finger was on the trigger.
to pay.
That's who I wanted. And
So does it sicken you that he's on the street?
uh, I'm not going to give anyone that satisfaction by answering that by saying yes. But
It would probably
yeah,
bother me. I mean, I get what you're saying.
yeah, it does. And then Gioli comes home in 24. So
Yeah, he's tried to get out multiple times. But yeah, listen, Bill. Obviously, I feel like we could sit here and talk for hours. Like I said, this is one of the more enlightening interviews I've had, and I want to kind of end it with giving you some opportunity, really, to just kind of surmise, where you are now. You obviously, you live somewhere in America. You have a different life now. You have children. They're grown. You have a wife that you've been with forever. You have a new life now. Um, I guess I'll ask you, do you miss that old life? Do you, obviously the days of the social clubs and your father and kind of the fact that he wasn't the easiest dad when you were a kid, but he in a way taught you and gave you certain things that he probably knew he didn't have himself, that he wanted to maybe give to you, and maybe you do something different with your life. Um, just kind of surmise where you are now and what you're up to, and just the kind of state. I think it's clear you're obviously in a different state of mind now.
Yes, for sure. Um, First off, I'm out in Arizona. I've been out here since
I didn't want to say
2000.
if you didn't want me to.
Nah, it's okay. Everybody knows I'm out here now. But I've been out here since '06. You know, my life has been a work in progress since '99. Um, I've learned many things about myself through reflection, through therapy. Um, but my life today is it's all about my family. I'm with my wife. We're together 32 years, married 27. I'm only 52. So my wife has been around with me since she saw me get involved with my dad. So she's been around for all of the good times and obviously the bad times. My children, three beautiful kids that, Jeff, all I care about is being in the moment with them. Um, I talk with them every day, uh, all day long. And the rapport that I have with my children, um, and in part because of the way I was raised, um, I've never picked my hands up to my children. I can't even say whether they were ever punished. They're good kids. So, but going forward, I just want to continue to um, just be a good person, like without judging people. Like, look, we all got a past, right?
Yeah,
We've all done things in our past, Jeff, that I don't think we'd be human if we said we've never done anything wrong. I mean, that would be nonsense. So, you live, you learn, and you try to make tomorrow better than it is today. And, that's something that it's always going to be a work in progress for me, you know. And this is why it's taken me such a long time to even do some of these interviews. Because it was hard for me in the beginning, um, but now I just want to be able to share some of the good times and obviously some of the bad times with people. People have a ton of questions to ask in regards to Wild Bill, and I think I just got to a point where um, I'm doing my dad a disservice if I don't speak um, about him. I truly feel that he's probably saying, Willie, it's okay, man. You can talk about some stuff, you know. But one thing, Jeff, with the podcast, with Jeremy and I on the 11th Avenue podcast, um, one thing I really try to refrain from doing, um, and that's speaking ill about guys.
yeah,
I try to explain to people that when I talk about certain things, I am telling you stuff from how I was seeing things through my eyes 20 years ago or over 20 years ago. So when you hear me say that, you know, I loved Chicky. I still have a love for Chicky. Um,
right.
Same thing with the Campies. 99.9% of those guys. Now, for the rest of the world that read about these people, uh, people say, what is he out of his mind? Like, how
Right.
could he like these people? But I grew up knowing them in a different way,
For sure.
so they were big brothers to me. And like I said to you earlier, so on the show, I refrain from talking bad about anybody unless it really really warrants it. You can't
Right.
really
Get
pick and
after it.
choose. um, But for the most part, we're having fun with it. We're putting out, um, content, and I want to start, going into a format where um, people can send in questions. We haven't done any lives yet, Jeff, so that's coming. But where I can interact with, the viewers and, tackle some of their questions you know, and just go from there. It's look, whether we're all, trying to accomplish something here on YouTube or on social media, I think we all are. I'm not looking to be a millionaire or, for a lot of people, it's their main revenue stream.
Right.
Um, but for me, right now, it's just something that it's more cathartic for me, Jeff, to finally be able to talk about some of this stuff. And, you know, and for the people that want to take shots at me, um, from whether I smile too much or maybe my shirt's an off color or,
Listen, Bill, I think you're just a happy guy, man. And I don't think anybody for a life that you've had, it's a very interesting one. It's a sad one. I think you're owed a lot of that now. And look, like I told you, I wouldn't let it bother you. And I don't think it does. I think you just do what you do. You hang with your family. I was blown away with how your kids know nothing about the mob, which is,
yeah,
fascinating to me. They don't ask. And I think they respect that. I also I've noticed your show, like you've only just started it. You're already getting people that are interested in it. You do a lot of other things too. You talk about baseball, you talk about sports, you talk about different things. You mix in stories, which is cool. And as I said, I'm going to drop the channel link. Please go subscribe, check it out. Bill, I'm going to probably, hopefully in the future, maybe I'll get out to Arizona. Maybe we can do this again and talk a little
oh,
bit
I'd
more.
love for you.
Um,
My
I do
pleasure.
also want to say with kind of dates and stuff here, at the time of your father's death, he was only 49 years old, which I kind of looked at it twice and I said, that doesn't make sense. And I said, you know what? I guess he wasn't very old. But good. And I'm glad you were able to find a new way in life. And, I don't think any of us, if any of us have a brain, I don't think anyone would actually be mad at you for it. So I'm glad you're moved on in your life. But like I said, I think it's one of the more enlightening interviews I've ever done. Um, and go check out the 11th Ab podcast on YouTube. Go subscribe, go check it out. You're already doing pretty well with it. Thanks for coming on, Bill. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Jeff. It was my pleasure, and I wish we could have done it sooner. But you know what? Better late than never, brother.
Well, that's exactly right. And I want to also say, I hope you and your family have a good holiday. And I thank everybody for listening. This is a little bit longer than our normal shows, but I felt again, I mean, the information is important and it's very detailed. And I'm glad, Bill, you're able to come on. So good luck with everything. I'm sure we'll speak to you again soon.
Yes.
By the way, you ever go to New York? You ever come to New York?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe one
Yeah.
day we'll get you to come up to the Barstool office. We'll meet each other then, and you can come up and we can
I
hang
would
out.
love to.
But that being said, guys, thank you as always for watching. Bill, we'll let you go. I've had you on for too
Thank you.
long. Thanks for coming
No.
on. We'll talk soon. All right.
Thank you, everybody. I love you all. Jeff, I'll talk to you soon, brother.
Okay,
Thank
Bill.
you.
Thanks for coming on, brother. Take it easy.
All right.
Um, all right, guys, that's the show. Very detailed, right? I mean, it's important that we get all that info out there. Bill has a wild life, a fascinating life, and his father truly was one of the most important people, really, from the 70s on in the Colombo crime family. A treacherous, crazy life. And I'm happy to say it that Bill's doing better now and has moved on in his life. So I appreciate him coming on. I thought that was great. And that's just what we do here on the sit down. So we will be back next week with another great episode. I think our friend Barstool Chief will be on again. We'll do another great biography. But I hope you enjoyed the episode. As always, make sure if you're new around here, you're checking us out on iTunes, on Spotify. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you leave us a review. Let us know what you think of the show. Follow us on Twitter at Sitdown Crime Pod, and make sure we have some merch now available in the Barstool store. Please go support the show, buy some merch, get yourself a long sleeve shirt for the fall weather. I appreciate it all. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next week here on the Sit Down.